This is the world's smallest smartphone, or it was in 2019 when I bought it. I've had it lying around ever since, so it might not be anymore, but it's close enough. Anyway, here it is playing Cyberpunk 2077. Let's talk game stuff. What we're looking at is a Soyes brand mobile phone with full 4G capabilities, apparently. I don't know, I've never put a SIM card in it. I'm more interested in the novelty of what you can play on it, and believe me, viewer, you can play more than you think. The first thing you'll notice is you might not notice it at all. It is absolutely tiny, which is sort of the point. For the sake of comparison, here it is sitting next to my daily driver phone, the OnePlus 7 Pro. And also for the sake of comparison, here's a single Nintendo Switch Joy-Con. That should hopefully give you some idea of just how teensy teeny weeny tiny this thing actually is. Having done some googling, I've found the following specifications, but please take them with a grain of salt, because it's hard to find any concrete information at all. Supposedly, we're looking at a MediaTek MTK 6737 quad-core processor, 2GB of RAM, 16GB of internal storage that isn't expandable, and a 3-inch 16:9 screen with a resolution of 480 by 854. Because of the age of the thing, you're going to be stuck on Android 6.0, and I'm unable to find any updates, either official or otherwise, so we'll just have to make do with what we have. This is, of course, going to limit what you can install, and if you do get one of these for some reason, I'd recommend not putting too much sensitive information in due to the very old maximum security patch level. It does have full Google Play Store access though, so you should be able to get to all of your apps if you can find any that are still compatible, but we'll get to all of that in a bit. The most important thing for us right now is gaming performance, so without further ado, let's jump into... First up is the Nintendo Entertainment System using the FCE Ultra Core in RetroArch, and everything's pretty great. This is Batman, one of the best movie tie-in games ever made. Please leave a comment if you've ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight. This is running at full speed without any issues. Throughout all of these tests, I will be using a GameSir G3S controller connected via Bluetooth, and more on that later on. Because can you imagine what it'd be like trying to use my massive sausage thumbs on this tiny 3-inch screen? Keeping it in the realm of 8-bit, Master System performance is about the same, using the Genesis Plus GX core to play the Master System version of Sonic 1, which has the amazing Jungle Zone in with this frankly incredible music. While we're around Sega anyway, let's check out the Game Gear in the same core. This is the GG Shinobi, one of my personal favourites, and it should come as no surprise that the performance is absolutely fine. You can take to the ninja streets as a ninja and chop down a helicopter in glorious full speed, if you want. The Game Gear, of course, was a handheld device, and we're moving on to another handheld device in the Game Boy Color. I'm going straight to the Color simply because if a device can do the GBC, it can almost definitely handle the regular monochrome one. So here's Link's Awakening DX running just fine on RetroArch's Gambate core. It's not quite the Switch remake, but it'll do for now. Sticking with Nintendo portables, let's try out the Game Boy Advance. And since we did Shinobi on the Game Gear, let's stick with that ninja theme and try out Ninja 5-0, one of the most obscure and underrated games of the portable era. This is in RetroArch's MGBA core, and we're absolutely fine. Now into the 16-bit console era, and we're straight in with a Super Nintendo, or as all the cool people know it, the SNES. Here's Mighty Morphin Power Rangers running at full speed in the SNES 9X core. Be aware though that things do get a little bit shakier when you try and run some of the 3DFX chip games. So we've jumped over to the free standalone SNES 9X EX emulator from the Play Store for Star Fox, which then runs totally fine. Back in RetroArch for the Mega Drive, or I suppose Sega Genesis if you're American and a fan of Phil Collins, and the Genesis Plus GX core has no problem doing the job I assume it was named for. When dealing with Outrun, by the way, Magical Sound Shower is always the correct choice, just so we're clear. Outrun was, of course, an arcade game first before coming to home consoles, so let's see how we do with arcade titles. Arcade games in general are, on any device at all, a mixed bag simply because of the sheer breadth of hardware configurations that you're trying to emulate. I'd also recommend going to the standalone MAME emulator from the Play Store, not just on this device but really just as good practice, because as long as you can match up your ROM set to the right version, your chances of success are quite a bit higher. I particularly like the vertical form factor for your vertically scrolling cave shooters. I'm still terrible at them, but at least I have the right aspect ratio. This little thing is doing okay, but you can kinda tell we're starting to bump up against the limits of what the hardware can put out. Now, running up to the 16-bit era is generally fine on most devices, and you might not be too impressed so far. But what if I told you that this thing can, under the right circumstances, handle full-speed PlayStation 1 emulation? You'll have to use our old friend EPSXE with all of its quirky built-in speed hacks and inaccuracies, but you can get full-speed PlayStation with little effort. I wouldn't recommend going with the RetroArch cores or even the very excellent DuckStation, but if you don't mind stepping back a little bit in terms of accuracy, you can step all the way forward in terms of speed. It's very impressive, and it's about the point where I thought this cheap little 3-inch thing would start to fall apart. Unfortunately, the superb standalone Saturn emulator Yaba Sanshiro isn't compatible with Android 6, which, as I mentioned, we are stuck on. And the RetroArch core is clearly trying, but it's just not good enough to be playable. So the Saturn is sadly off the table at any reasonable speed. Still, the Sega Saturn is notoriously difficult to emulate anyway, so this isn't all that surprising. You know what is surprising though? Can I interest you in some Dreamcast emulation? This is Raycast running Sonic Adventure 2. Not fully accurate, but certainly fully playable. Same can be said for Soul Calibur, which is great, because it means I can spam Nightmare's massive sword on a very tiny screen, and it all seems a little bit ironic. Redream unfortunately won't install on Android 6, but Raycast is still a very impressive option. Speaking of very impressive, here's the notoriously finicky Nintendo 64 on Mupen 64 FZ standalone running Banjo-Kazooie. I've seen higher end devices that cost 3 times as much as this struggle, so this is a pretty impressive showing for the little pocket-sized phone that could. Before you ask, sadly no, we can't do PSP, GameCube or PS2. So this is about the extent of the emulation you're going to get out of this tiny little device. But that's not necessarily the most impressive part. Minecraft. That works. It takes a while to get going because of the low amount of RAM, but it works. You can craft some mines or whatever it is you do. There is also a breadth of older 3D titles that work very well here, like Crazy Taxi, which I'm talking over because as great as the soundtrack is, it's not so brilliant when you'd rather not have YouTube throwing copyright strikes in your face. Just imagine that you're listening to The Offspring while I show this off. Again, your mileage will vary a lot here and you are limited by what's available on Android 6, but if you dig around a little bit, you'll find a lot of titles that, at first glance, you'd never dream of being able to play on a device this small, this cheap, and frankly this weak. Again, at my best research estimates, this has only 2 gigs of RAM and a very, very low-end old processor from 2019. So these results are more than a little bit surprising. You know what it's absolutely best in class at though? Flappy Bird. Remember Flappy Bird? It's like it was made for this device. One finger, simple graphics, nice and quick, reactive, perfect. It is the perfect Flappy Bird machine. I don't know how much that's worth to you though. But the topic of worth does lead us neatly to the big question. Now, as positive as I've been, I have to be honest with you. I don't really know why you would ever buy one of these. I bought it back then out of curiosity because the novelty of having the world's smallest smartphone seemed interesting, but I don't actually know what tangible use cases you'd ever have for this. It's also full of operating system bugs and some very poor performance. It can't read OTG cables for controllers for some reason, so you're forced to connect via Bluetooth. And the Bluetooth connection is absolutely horrible, disconnecting at random, sometimes as often as twice per minute. So I can't even recommend it as a neat little portable emulator. The performance is impressive and surprising, but there's no way you'd ever fit it meaningfully into something like your daily commute. And there's better devices for about the same price if you want to sit at home and play something that way. All in all, I think it's fair to say it's a novelty, but by the end of making this video, I have to say that the novelty has worn off. Oh, and Cyberpunk at the start of the video was streaming through the Moonlight app really, really badly. I imagine that was obvious, but I didn't want you to think I'm clickbaiting you. And now...